So, good morning, everyone. Very happy to be your first speaker this morning. Today, we're going to talk about the state of the capitalist system. But we're going to do that within the context or the theme of this conference, and that is the future of European integration. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend the first 15 minutes looking at the history of modern European economics, where it's been, the lessons that have been learned, and where it needs to go from here. Then in the last 15 minutes, we'll focus on the state of the capitalist system. Capitalism is experiencing one of its most profound challenges in its history. Some scholars even believe that capitalism will not survive the current technological disruption. So, towards the end, we'll take a look at the elements that are shaping the future and what we can do about it as, I usually say, spiral dynamic wizards, but as integralists as well. So, many of you are seeing this slide for the third time in 10 days, but I think it's important for us to frame global economics in the Gravesian model as early as we can when we're talking about a concept as expansive as the capitalist system. What you see in front of you is the economics spiral that represents global productive output. The first level is the purple system. Today, purple is represented by agricultural societies, simple trade and production. That system represents about 3% of total global GDP. The system above that is the red system. Red system today is represented by countries who rely on most of their national wealth through extractive activities. You dig a hole in the ground and you find that you're rich, except that richness arrests you in the red system. OPEC is in that system. Russia, unfortunately, has fallen back to that system. Many countries that rely on extractive activity fall into that system. Many countries in Africa and South America. The next system above that is the blue system. The blue system today is represented by China. Central planning and production. Blue is an essential transitional state for any modern economy, but you can't stay in it forever. Most of the economic slowdown that you're experiencing around the world today is because China is transitioning from blue economics to orange market-based economics. China can no longer maximize production. If it's going to base it on market forces, it cannot produce as much as it did in the past. And therefore, China sneezes and the world goes to the hospital. The system above that is the orange system. The orange system represents the developed first world, Western Europe, United States, and Japan. That system today still claims the lion's share of total global GDP, 55%. Unfortunately, in the US and the UK, that system is identified with financial innovation, which is, as we will see later, is bringing an end to the capitalist system as we know it. The system above that is the green system. Green economics have been in Europe for several decades. They began emerging in the United States just a few decades ago with the advent of the internet. That system represents about 12% in total global GDP. And what we're seeing is the emergence of the yellow system, the second tier. To me, to my framework, that system is represented by two types of identities, or I should say organizations that are forming that system. First are the members of the conscious capitalism movement, and I know my yellow system has gotten a lot of criticism from my European colleagues, but there are reasons on why those companies have been chosen. If you've read my book, you will see the analysis that I've done on why companies like Whole Foods are part of that second-tier system. The other type of organization that is shaping that second-tier system are members of the knowledge economy, Web 2.0. And at the helm of that system is Google. Okay? I know I just upset some people in saying that. Let me tell you why I picked Google. Google is a systemic disruptor, and in the United States, we need Google. Simply because our orange system has gotten so toxic that it is incapable of reforming itself. When things get to be that toxic, you have to disrupt them out of their slumber, and if a cost of that is that they will not make it again, well, that's just fine, because the emerging system has completely different metrics than what the orange system has, and we'll take a look at that the second half of the presentation. So, if you realized in orange, you see all capital in the world as financial capital. If you realized in green, you see all capital in the world as human capital. But if you think from second tier, you begin to see how important societal capital is. Okay? I just wanted to frame global economics in this. I'm sure it is not a perfect image, but this is the closest I can come to framing what global economics looks like through the value systems framework. All right, so if you are a European country who wants to join the EU, what are the steps that you have to take? What you see in front of you is a roadmap that is right from the European Regional Development Office. There are 3 objectives that have to be met in order for you to successfully ascend into the EU. The white boxes that you see on the left are the spiral dynamic interpretations of what these steps are. I really want you to pay close attention to the first objective, convergence. What does convergence mean? Convergence means that you have to reform the blue systems that are in place. So if this is a system that is going in place in a former communist country, you have to go back to the communist and the socialist spiral and dig down as far as you need to pacify the previous systems that were there before and put in their place a democratic blue system that is market-oriented. Okay? So this requires the building capacities of system-wide institutions that are geared towards democracy and market economies. Step 2 is further expansion of that blue system that allows for orange complexity to be built on the top of that. And step 3 is when you begin to show regional resilience. Step 3 enables you to ascend into the EU with blue, orange, and green capacities as you join the EU. We're going to take a look at 4 examples of European countries here, and I realized that I was only taking 6 minutes of my time. I still have 4 minutes in addition to that, right? So what we're going to look at is 4 examples of how that convergence happened in some of the modern European economics. What you see in front of you is a meme graph, or a graph of those value systems stacked on the top of each other. The first one is that of the US and the UK. I am not claiming that the US and the UK have exactly the same economic system, but beginning from the 1980s, the UK economy began to look a lot more like that of the United States. Both countries abandoned industrial capitalism and adopted financial capitalism as their way forward. So up to the 1930s, you can look at the meme stack there. Both economies were dominated by monopolistic and oligarchical values. A handful of men build entire infrastructure of countries. That system collapsed with the Great Depression and the end of World War II, and out of its ashes rose the blue system. The UK had Keynesian economics, that is the bluest, most modern economic ideology that built modern day nations. In the United States, we had FDR and the policies of the New Deal. It gave us all the blue institutions that we still identify with today. Then in the 1970s, the world got hit by 2 external factors that will affect the future of capitalism forever. First, we got removed off the gold standard, so the historic blue that held the ethos of capitalism together was removed, and then we got hit by the Arab oil embargo. And suddenly the EU and the UK found that their products are not as competitive as those of Germany and Japan. So what do? In the United States, we elected Ronald Reagan, who on his inaugural speech proclaims that government is the enemy of business, and proceeds and systemically deregulates the entire American economy. What happens when you weaken blue? Of course, red is going to rise. The layer that you see above blue, that is the unhealthy orange expression, okay? And you can see the growth of unhealthy orange through financial innovation, okay? It allows you still to do a little bit of orange. But then we were all hopeful that by the time the financial crisis hit, that government will wake up and realize that we need to rebuild that blue system that regulates capitalist activities. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened, but which is a tremendous concern for a lot of people. But you begin to see an anomaly that is going to really affect what the future of capitalism looks like. When you give money through financial innovation, when you give money to the entire spiral, almost every value system on the spiral benefits. So you continue to see the growth of the red system, you continue to see the growth of the unhealthy orange system, but at the same time, you continue to see the growth of the orange system through innovation, research, and development. And for the first time in history, we're seeing the exponential growth of the green economy. After the financial crises, renewable energy technologies and economic activity has gone up 12 to 15 times from where it was in 2008. Okay, so that's one profile of an economy. The next one we're going to profile is that of Germany. Germany, right out of the end of World War II, adopted the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe and Japan and put those countries' industrial production into peaceful uses, okay? That was met with the policies of Ludwig Erhard, who was not just happy with implementing a new blue system. The Germans are lovers of blue. They wanted to make absolutely sure that there will be no repeat of the past. So Ludwig Erhard goes back and pacifies all the monopolies and the oligarchies that existed prior to the end of the war. He was the first to introduce modern econometrics at a cabinet level, the first country in Europe to do so. The next system after that was the era where Karl Schiller was. This is really the implementation of blue economic policies through the Keynesian model. I confuse Keynes with Graves. I usually say Gravesian, but it is Keynesian. Building blue institutions, building higher orange capacities, and of course, Germany has a thick green layer in its economy. That system moved forward. It was affected a little bit, but what we were affected with in the 1970s. Then came in the administration of Helmut Kohl, who privatized a small percentage of the government holding in big German companies. But then came the fall of the Berlin Wall. And does anybody like that? I can't say I originally created that. I borrowed that from Thomas Friedman. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the rise of the Berlin Wall. And this is really where you got to pay attention to the convergence process. Okay, here we are 25 years after the wall fell, and there's still tremendous disparities between Western Germany and Eastern Germany. On average, millionaires in West Germany outnumber those in East Germany 10 to 1. The average net worth of a Western German is 2.5 times the size of that in East Germany. And West German labor on average makes about 30 to 35% more than the East German, okay? That memetic stack, that last column that you see, that is an ideal memetic stack for a capitalist culture. That is a balanced system, okay? The next country we're going to profile is that of our host country here, Hungary. Right out of the collapse of the Berlin Wall, Hungary immediately wanted to become a part of the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. As a requirement for membership, you have to embrace democratic institutions, and you also have to base your economy on a market economy that is based on supply and demand, basically the orange system. So immediately out of that, Hungary employed systemic deregulation and reforms of their industry. privatization. They reformed their tax codes. They reformed their tax policies, their trade policy, fiscal policy, educational system. They did all that, building a thick layer of blue, a thick layer of orange, and just enough green so people from under the old system don't have to struggle as we move forward. By the time Hungary joined the EU in 2004, it has done such a good job in doing that conversions part that it had all its loans to the IMF and the World Bank paid off. Okay? Then when a financial crisis hit, Hungary wasn't affected as some of the most advanced economies in the world. So it was resilient. It moved forward. By 2011, it adopted a new constitution. And this is really something that I really want Europeans in the audience to understand. The idea of a new constitution, the example of Hungary is important to understand. It preserves the identity of Hungary while at the same time allowing it to be a part of the EU. I think this is very important. If you remember Dr. Beck's presentation from 2 days ago about meshworks, okay? The EU should not look to be a melting pot. It should be a meshing part, preserving the identity of each country while swimming in a rich broth called the EU. If you can see that imagery, okay? A melting pot makes it all into one big unhealthy green gob. You don't want that. The last economy we're going to profile is that of Greece. How not to integrate. Out of World War II, Greece fell into a civil war. Out of that civil war, it fell into a dictatorship. Greece did not become a democracy again till 1974. But all throughout, from 1950 till about 2000, Greece experienced some of the highest rate of economic expansion, but they were coupled with inflation rates of about 10 to 15% a year. And economists couldn't figure out how. But then, after they joined the EU, we figured out how. Apparently, they've been deficit funding their economic growth for decades. And with the help of our wonderful investment banks in the United States, Goldman Sachs and company, they cleverly cooked the books to hide the debt off books. And so when they joined the EU, none of that debt was apparent. That is not to exonerate the EU and German bankers. There would have been other ways to figure out whether Greece is hiding money or not. But they came in and gave them money anyway, and the financial crisis happened, and Greece is in default. Never looking to see whether they did the conversions necessary, the entire economy stayed in the hands of oligarchs and monopolies, shipbuilders. Okay? I have data to back this up, by the way, in the follow-up session later on today. If you have any questions, please come see me with that presentation. So where do we go from here? And I hope I have a little more time than that. So if we're looking at a continent as diverse, or at a continent that has so much asymmetry in its economic profiles, where do we go from here? The map that you see in front of you is right from the EU Economic Regional Policy Office. The countries that are marked in blue are those who are doing well. The ones that are marked in yellow are in between, and the ones that are marked in red are the ones that are doing less well. Their income is about 75% or lower than the average income of the EU. As a matter of fact, a quarter of those countries make less than 50% of the average EU. Another quarter makes less than 60%. How do you bring them to the same prosperity as the rest of Europe? You do the first two steps, the conversions steps. You make sure that they build their own indigenous blue democracy with a market-oriented economy, and you build orange complexity on the top of that before they integrate. Okay? So to level the asymmetry that still exists in Europe, you have to adopt those blue-orange policies in order for the continent to be at the same comparative level before it can go up to healthy green and second tier. And my favorite quote about the orange system, and it applies especially here in Europe because of its history of wars, is the code that you see up here from Don. Once you're in orange, you have a portfolio to protect. Ideology and dogmatic blue from the past begins to disappear, making way for a peaceful and prosperous future.